Hi folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This week's furniture painting video. I have no idea how this is going to go. I've got an idea in my head for these little trio of nesting tables behind. Is it going to work? I don't know. Stay tuned to find out. So first things first, as always, we're going to give the piece a good clean. This is an absolute minimum with regards to prep work that you should do before you paint an item of furniture. Even if your furniture looks super clean, it's always a good idea to clean them first, because you don't know what's on the surface. There could be polish or cleaning products on there, and that's just going to resist paint and stop it from sticking to the surface. So once I've cleaned my pieces with Dixie Belle's White Lightning, I then rinse it off with clean warm water and let them dry. Next, I sanded down the tops with my Festool. If you want to see a little bit more about the sander that I use, I'll link the video top right now. You can go and have a look at that. And then I scuff sanded the rest of the tables. So the plan for these originally was to sand the tops back and try and give them a pale stain. I was going to use no paint gel stain in pickling white, but when I sanded off the finish, it was apparent that there was some joins in the wood that, I don't know if you can see that. It's because they're modern pieces, they're not nice old pieces. They've also got something which I particularly hate, which is they've done something to make them look old. So if you can see there, right in the corner, there's some little holes and some like score marks in the wood. Now, that's not woodworm, that hasn't been done from wear and tear. That's something that manufacturers put there to look old. And I am not a fan, I will tell you, I am not a fan. Okay, so we established I wasn't a fan of that, and we had to change plans. We had to pivot, as Ross once said in Friends. So I am giving the tops a coat of clear Boss. That's going to stop any bleed through, but it's also going to enable me to distress the top and still see some wood peeking through. So in order to cover most of the top, because it was pretty ugly, the wood grain is nothing special at all, and there was those ugly joins in the wood, as well as those horrible marks where they've tried to sort of artificially age the tables, which we've already established I don't like. I am using Silk all-in-one mineral paint in the colour Endless Shore. I've also mixed a little bit of sea spray into the paint to add a little bit of texture, so quite naturally this paint wants to lie flat. I want to create a vintage kind of rustic look with these, so I'm adding a little bit of texture into the paint just to give that kind of effect. And then with a shop cloth with a little bit of water sprayed on it, I'm just wet distressing the paint before it dries, and that's just going to allow a little bit of that wood to peek through, so we still get the impression that there's wood underneath without showing all the not so nice wood grain. When it dried, I also applied a second very thin coat of Endless Shore, minus the sea spray, just to add extra coverage in the areas that it needed. And then we can move on to the bottom half of the tables. So I chose the colour Conch. Again, it's from the Silk Mineral Paint line. And again, I am using sea spray, and I'm stippling the paint mixture onto the surface to add a little bit of texture. I haven't used a lot of sea spray at all. I don't want this really clumpy and heavily textured. I just want to introduce a little bit of texture to the surface, which will basically help me down the line when I'm adding my techniques further along. That texture is just going to help the sort of overall effect that I'm going for. So once the first layer of Conch had been dried a couple of hours, I then applied a second layer, and this is just going to basically build up coverage and get a really nice solid pink colour. So to add a little bit of depth and dimension and just enhance some of the kind of texture that I've added, I'm going to do a colour wash, and I'm going to do it in silk, and I'm also going to do it in red, which was a bit risky, but this red is got quite a lot of pink undertone, so when it's watered down you'll see that it actually does look quite pinky. And you can absolutely do a colour wash with silk mineral paint. Just bear in mind that if you do add more than 10% water into silk, you will need to basically top coat it, because the built-in top coat that silk has won't be sort of effective when you add a lot of water to it like I'm doing. So once I had the colour wash in my bowl, or once I'd mixed it up, and all a colour wash is essentially water with paint mixed in. The more water you add, obviously the weaker the solution. I just painted it all over the piece. I'm working in small areas so that the paint doesn't dry before I have chance to remove the excess. And this is just going to sit in the sort of creases, and that little bit of texture that I added with the base layer is going to kind of sit in all of those and add a sort of sense of dimension and depth to the paint colour. So like I say, I am working in small areas at a time, because if you allow this to dry, it's quite hard to remove it. So you'll get left with the sort of red, very apparent red colour. So I'm just working one side at a time, removing the excess, twisting it round, and you can also add a little bit of water via your spray bottle. That just helps kind of lift that paint wash a little bit more as well. Once that first colour wash was dry, I went back in with this exactly the same colour wash, and my brush was practically dry. There was hardly any product on it, and I'm just stippling on a little bit more of that red colour wash solution. Just again, it just adds a little bit of dimension, so you can sort of add, it's buildable. A colour wash is buildable. You don't just have to do one colour wash and leave it. And I'm going to add even more layers to this. So I'm going to use a whitewash glaze, and a glaze is going to work in a very similar way to the paint wash. You can actually do this technique with a watered down paint solution if you wanted to. I'm just showing you how I did it with a glaze, and again I'm doing it in a very similar way. So this is just going to really soften everything that I've put down and lighten it up. And the nice thing about a whitewash is that it does distress and sort of add age, but in more of a kind of sun bleached way. So you don't have to sort of introduce darker waxes or things like that for distressing. You can actually add the impression of age with a whitewash glaze or a whitewash paint wash. Say that again fast. Like I said, it works in a very similar way to the wash that I just did with the red. So I'm just painting it on liberally and then removing the excess with a rag. Again, working in small areas so that it doesn't have chance to dry. It does have a slightly longer open time than paint, but I just didn't want it to dry too quickly and run the risk of not being able to remove as much of the whitewash glaze as I wanted to. So I'll just show you a little close-up here. You can rub it off. You can also add some really interesting effects if you sort of dab your rag across the surface. That just adds like the impression of texture without actually adding texture. So there's loads of different effects that you can achieve with a glaze or a paint wash. And again, I did the same kind of effect on the top. So I just really lightly sanded the top to make sure it was nice and smooth to touch. And then I applied a coat of the whitewash glaze as well. It's obviously going to be a lot more subtle because it is going on to a neutral colour. So it's not as noticeable as if you were going over the pink, for example. But it just kind of ties it together and adds that little bit of extra dimension rather than it just being one flat colour. So because I'm going for that kind of vintage French look, I'm going to distress this a little bit. I'm just taking some sandpaper that was pretty much past its best from my Festool sander, and I'm just lightly rubbing that down some areas that I want to expose the wood. Now, silk dry is very durable, and it's actually very tough. So the sooner you can distress, the easier it's going to be. And I'm just basically doing what I think is going to suit the piece. Anything too heavily distressed on this I don't think would work, so I am just making it really, really subtle and just sort of taking it off sort of edges and corners. And she is back with Whitewash Glaze. We haven't finished with it yet. I'm adding a small amount on my brush and removing the excess. So I've barely got any product on there. And I'm almost using it as a dry brush technique. So I'm just taking that little amount of product and using it as a highlighter on certain areas just to add a little bit more dimension. And then we're going to go back to the tops, and I'm going to introduce a little bit more sort of age and depth to the tops, because I felt they were a little bit flat looking versus the bottom half of the tables. So I have basically liberally applied Best Dang Waxing Grey all over the top, and then immediately after, I'm not letting this dry down at all, I'm just going to remove the excess with a shop cloth. So because I painted these in silk, which has a built-in top coat, that's going to allow me to control the application of grey wax. If I was using chalk mineral paint on the tops, I would have applied either a clear coat first or a layer of clear wax, which is going to basically make the removal of the grey wax a lot easier, and it's not going to grip onto the chalk mineral paint. But because I'm using silk, which has that built-in top coat, it kind of has the same effect. So that's why I've not used a top coat in between the application of the white paint and the grey wax. I really hope that makes sense to you. Now we can top coat. I'm going to use Gator Hide because these are nested tables, and to me, people use tables to put coffee cups on, wine glasses on. So I'm going to give these the best protection that I can and use Gator Hide. Has she finished faffing around with the tables? She absolutely has not, and there was a intended pun there. So I'm just spritzing the table really lightly with water. I'm getting a very small amount of the colour Pine Cone from the chalk mineral paint range on an artist brush, and then I'm just lying it in the sort of areas that I want to add a little bit more age in. I don't want to go in with brown wax, that's going to be a little bit too heavy for this look. So I'm using a clean dry brush and I'm just feathering that pine cone out ever so slightly, and it's just going to give me a real subtle little bit of aging to the corners. And I did that around the rest of the tables, basically anywhere that I wanted to add a shadow. So I've used dry brushing with a glaze to add a little bit of a highlight, and then I'm using this technique to add that little bit of a sort of a shadow or aging technique. And just to pull it all together to make it all consistent, I did that same effect with the pine cone colour around the lip of the table. So just introduce a very slight amount of that brown and just feathered it out with a clean dry brush. And if you see my sock in the background, no you didn't. I added another coat of Gator Hide on the tops just for ultimate protection, and then I use Best Dang Wax for the bases just to give a nice subtle sheen. Hopefully there you can see that really kind of subtle tonal look to the pink, and I just kept it really simple and hopefully chic with the staging for the final shot. Thanks for watching the video this week. As always, I hope you liked it, and I hope you liked some of the techniques that I used on these French inspired tables. And make sure you hit the subscribe button for more furniture painting videos.